Number 1. I was about 13 or 14 when I was babysitting 2 boys for some church members. I had done it before and the kids loved me and the parents were very comfortable with me. This was a night that they were going to be gone for pretty much until like 2:30 in the morning. I was doing it for free that day because they were going to do some church related stuff, and that's just how I rolled. Anyway, the house they lived in was an apartment complex. You know, one of those small ones that had 2 floors and 4 places in each spot. And they're on the bottom floor with 2 bedrooms on either side of the apartment, with the kitchen on the left side and the living room on the right, with the sliding glass door to a small patio and a public bathroom next to the front door. It was, I think, about 1:30 in the morning, and I knew they would be getting home soon. The kids were knocked out, obviously after practically begging to, and 3 bedtime stories, and I had finished all my homework and didn't have cable. This was before Netflix became an online service, so they had a couple of DVDs here and there and VHSs to watch, so I grabbed LAN before time to make the night go quicker. I was already very tired and had nodded off a couple of times. At about 2 a.m, I could hear knocking on the front door. Knowing the parents had a key, I did nothing but sit there in the dark with the TV glowing. Being a paranoid person who watches and reads enough horror, I grabbed the baseball bat that was next to the couch, and what happened next will haunt me forever. I heard a small voice, almost like a young female's voice. "Oh dear, that won't help you." My heart stopped and I realized the patio door didn't have the blinds shut. My eyes shift slowly to the door, and I see someone on the patio staring in. I couldn't make anything out rather than they were very short and wide. I screamed and ran into the kids' room. Thankfully, they were still asleep. Sadly, this was before I had a cell phone, and there were no cordless phones. All I did was push the dresser in front of the door and stared at the one window of the room. That's when it became dark as a shadow loomed on the window. The knocking started again, and the woman's voice called out, "Come on, dearie, I won't hurt you. Please come out." The window was being knocked so hard, I was afraid that it would break. The kids finally woke up, and they were screaming and scared. I was a big girl, and I could, at that time, lift my own weight. But knowing I had 2 kids with me, I became vulnerable and afraid. Within 2 seconds, I heard the father yell out, "Hey, who the hell are you?" And the person ran off. The front door opened, and there was harsh knocking on the kids' bedroom door. Thankfully, it was the parents. And after I let them in and put the dresser back, I explained what had happened, and they called the police. When they arrived, they obviously found nothing, but the bushes that hide the patio were obviously cut up and ripped up to get through. I babysat for them one more time after that, but about 5 months later, they moved away, and I never babysat anyone ever again. Also, to this day, I know the woman was long gone, but every time I hear a knock, a chill runs through me. Number 2. I'm pretty sure that I almost became a murdered babysitter urban legend. I've told this story to many people in my inner circle around the time that it happened, but I figured I would share this with you as well. I can verify this happened to me, and it isn't some friend of a friend story. 2 years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for these 2 ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m, and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when somebody knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and they both said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a grey hoodie deliberately hunched over so I can't see his face. Immediately, I'm like, nope, and don't say anything and start pacing around because I don't want to give him any inclination that we're inside. A couple of minutes later, I check outside the little window through the curtains, and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just kind of let it go as a prank. Cut to a few hours later, and the mums get back. They ask me how everything was, and I say that the kids were great, but somebody had come over to the door. They ask me what time, and I say around 8 p.m, and one of the mums starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other one tells me that right around that time, somebody had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like,
"I can see you through your window."
They didn't think it was serious, because it didn't make any sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, we're almost positive that it was me that he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to my car, and I touched base later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that. But I'm really glad that I didn't open that door, because I have a feeling in my gut that it would have been really, really bad.
Number 3.
I just recently had a baby boy, and over the past few months since his birth, I've spent a lot of time home alone during the day while my fiancée is at work. A few weeks ago, we had an incident that started a rather horrifying series of events. It was an early morning, around 7 a.m, and my fiancé had already left for work. After spending the morning feeding and lounging with the baby in our bedroom, he fell asleep in my arms, so I moved him into his bassinet located right next to the queen-sized bed. We live in a one-story home, so all of our rooms are ground floor. There are 2 large windows on our bedroom. They are narrow, but stretch from floor to ceiling, and let in a lot of beautiful natural light. After laying the baby down, I went to the kitchen to do some dishes. As I left the bedroom, I noticed that my cat was laying on the bed near the bassinet. When the baby first came, I never left the cat unsupervised with him. My cat is a very small female cat, and very quiet. However, I know that sometimes pets can act up when a new baby is born. Our son was now about 2 months old, and the kitty has been mostly disinterested in the baby, so I was no longer worried. I grabbed the baby monitor just to be safe, but felt pretty secure letting the cat sleep in the same room as the baby. I'd been in the kitchen doing the dishes for about 10 minutes when I heard the baby fussing a bit on the monitor. He whimpered a few times, and I kept an ear out to see if he'd fully wake up or if he was just falling in and out of sleep. Suddenly, I hear the cat through the monitor hissing and growling loudly. It was a deep, throaty growl that I'd never heard from her before. At the same time, the baby started wailing. The only time I'd ever heard him cry like that before was when he was getting his shots. It was a cry of real fear. I realized my worst fears were happening. I believed in having pets for life, and so when I found out that I was pregnant, I went to great lengths to prep the kitty. I wanted to make the transition good for her. I was super worried she wouldn't transition well, despite her easygoing personality. And now, here we were. My cat was attacking the baby, and it was my fault for leaving them alone together. At the first sound of the hissing and my baby's wailing, I dropped everything with soap still on my hands and sprinted 2 rooms over back to the bedroom. I walked into a scene that I didn't expect at all. The baby was kicking around in the crib, red-faced and crying, and the cat was sitting at the foot of his bassinet, facing away from the baby. She was facing the window across the room, puffed up and still growling. She wasn't attacking the baby. She was positioned to defend him. I looked to the window but saw nothing. The thick drapes were still drawn with a small open space between the fabric where the 2 drapes met in the middle. I pulled them back together and saw nothing out front. The cat had now stopped hissing, but was still quietly growling in a hunched up position. I picked up the baby to comfort him and pet the kitty until she calmed down. I didn't know what to think, but I was really on edge. Why had my cat freaked out? It was so out of character for her to react to random sounds or noises. I have never seen her so afraid. I remained unsettled for a few hours, but eventually forgot about it. A few days later, this time in the evening, I sat with the baby in the living room, between the bedroom and the kitchen, reading a book. My fiancé was home and just going to bed for the evening. It was about 9 p.m. He gets up at around 5 a.m. for work, so he doesn't stay up for very late. He was in our bedroom with the door closed, and I sat in the living room on the sofa. Our sofa is directly in front of a large bay window. It's very wide and goes floor to ceiling. The drapes are still open and it's not quite dark outside yet. The sun is just starting to set. At some point, I sat the baby down on a mat in the middle of the living room floor and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. While preparing some rice, I started to get a prickly feeling on the back of my neck. I felt as if someone was watching me, and for some reason I felt really reluctant to look out of the kitchen windows, which were also open. I quickly finished making food and decided to take it to the living room to eat. I didn't want to spend any more time in the kitchen. I walked back into the living room, bowl in hand. The doorway faces the large windows, so I was facing the giant windows as I walked in. That's when I saw her. There was a woman. She looked to be in her late 20s and early 30s, and she was staring, nose pressed up against the window, looking directly at my baby. She didn't seem to notice that I'd walked into the living room. She just intensely stared at the baby. She looked angry, and I was terrified. I grabbed the baby and yelled for my fiancé. The lady in the window then took off running. My fiancé came out in his boxers and was still half asleep. I told him about the woman and then about the previous day when the cat defended the baby. And I became convinced that she had been watching the baby that day as well. This last incident happened fairly recently, and I haven't noticed anything since. But I'm afraid that she's not done yet. And I honestly think that she wants my baby. I can't explain why I think that, but I'm convinced that she wants to kidnap him. Update. A few weeks passed really uneventfully, thank God. We were much more careful about locking up and keeping our windows locked and the drapes drawn at night. I was really on my guard for a few weeks after seeing the woman outside the window, but eventually let it go a bit. Then, our cat started acting odd again. I kept my baby boy in the room with me most of the time and always had monitors going when he wasn't in the room with me. One day, after feeding him, I laid the baby down to sleep and took a quick bath one room over. I had monitors on, but knew he'd sleep for about an hour, so I had some time to myself. The kitty was once again sleeping in the room with the baby, as she has been doing. About 15 minutes into my bath, I heard the cat hissing through the monitor. I jumped out, grabbed a towel, and ran into the room. She was pacing in from the large bay window with her back arched and her fur on end. The baby was still asleep and she dashed off when I went by her. like she was still really on edge and full of adrenaline. I peeked out of the window and looked all down the street, but saw nothing. So I let it go and kept the baby with me for the rest of the day. About a week after that incident, we had my fiance's good childhood friend come stay with us from a state over. He stayed for 4 days. He was alone in the house on day to day, while my fiance was at work, and I was out with the baby. He was sleeping on the couch at around noon, when he said he woke up to the sound of someone fiddling with the front door. He thought it was one of us coming home, so he fell back asleep. He half woke up again to the same sound coming from the back door. He thought we might have forgotten our keys, so he got up to let us in. My fiance then called him at this exact moment to check in, and his friend said, "I'm just about to let you in, 1 sec." My fiance then replied with, "I'm still at work and I just spoke to my wife, she's still out." His friend said he just sort of sat down and waited to hear some more noises. He heard what he thought sounded like someone walking the perimeter of the house, but he wasn't sure if he was imagining that part out of fear or not. The next day, our friend, who's also the baby's godfather, was watching the baby for an hour so I could go for a run. He told me, about 10 minutes after I'd left for a run, the cat started being really weird. She'd walk around the house sort of slinking around and was really flighty when he tried to approach her. She was very used to him and often let him pet her and snuggled up to him a lot. And it didn't make any sense that she'd be afraid of him all of a sudden, even though he spent the past 3 days with her. She would very often jump into the windowsills and hiss out of the window at nothing in particular. He kept looking out to see what she was so upset about, but saw nothing. When I got back and he told me about all of this, I had this sinking feeling that someone was prowling around our house. I was slightly afraid that whoever it was had watched me leave and knew that the baby was home with someone most likely less vigilant than his mama. I felt like maybe I was overreacting, but I just felt so weird about it. That last incident happened last week. This is about a month after our friend's visit. Nothing noticeable happened between then and now. Last week we went grocery shopping at a local store. I was pushing the cart and the baby was in his carrier in the cart. I turned to pour some almonds into a bag when a familiar looking woman approached us. I couldn't remember how I knew her, but I thought maybe I'd seen her at the store before. Anyway, she was cooing at the baby and saying how cute he was. I was polite and thanked her. She asked how old he was and I told her about 4 months. She said that it was a precious age and how it was nice that I was a young mum. She said she wanted to be a young mum but waited too long. She said it was good that I didn't wait. At this point I was feeling weird. We'd passed the point that I felt was a comfortable amount of time to randomly talk to people in the store. Many people comment on the baby when we're out and about and tell me how cute he is, ask his age, etc, etc. But usually after about a minute or two of polite conversations, we part ways and continue shopping. I was trying to finish up with the almonds and move on, but she was right in front of my cart. The conversation would sort of die out and I'd turn and then she'd start talking again. I felt like she was keeping me there. Finally, I turned to grab a tie for my bag and she said, "It's funny, he looks so much like me. I bet I could carry him around and no one would know that he's not mine." I got a huge chill and had a sneaking suspicion that she was familiar because she was the woman from the window. I was now panicking internally, but I didn't want to tip her off. I just sort of stood there, hovering over my baby. I laughed awkwardly and said that I needed to go. She asked to hold my baby and I realized that she was staring at him, not even looking at me while she asked, and I really firmly said, "No!" People were starting to look because my no was very loud. I pushed past her and she kept looking at him as we walked past. I checked out and booked it home. I'm honestly not 100% sure she was the woman from the window, but her behavior made me feel like she was the one. I'm not sure if I'm just overly paranoid, and I should add, my first child died at birth, and with this baby, I've been incredibly careful and sometimes overly worried. I do have a somewhat irrational fear of him dying because of the earlier loss. I'm afraid that I'm overreacting, but I also feel that this is getting to be out of hand now. I told my fiancée about the grocery store, and collectively we decided to install a security system. We are still shopping around for that. I don't want weapons in the house. We also tipped off the local police. They said they can do extra patrols, and I'm hoping they'll actually do this. Final update. So, a few people have asked for updates for this. I figured I'd just give a quick update rather than a long post. Basically, this went out with a whimper instead of a bang. Some weird activity happened off and on for a few weeks. This mostly consisted of the cat behaving oddly, but nothing really verifiable. We got a camera that was mounted on our porch, and we remained very wary of our surroundings. We warned our nanny too. Nothing new or significant has happened since then. We are now in the process of moving away, and will be in a town about 30 miles away from where we live now. So I think this may be the end of all the weirdness. Not a very climatic ending to my story, but incredibly relieving for our household.